A billionaire named Lawrence Bishop dropped his wallet in a New Orleans restaurant one night, a wallet with several $1,000s in cash in it, and he did not even notice it was gone. But a 20-year-old dishwasher named Micah Dorsey noticed. Micah found it on the floor by the bus station at the end of the night, fat with more money than he had ever held in his life, more money than would have solved every single problem he was drowning under. And Micah Dorsey was 3 days from being evicted, 3 days from losing the little brother and the little sister he was raising all by himself, and that wallet was the answer to every prayer he had stopped letting himself pray. And Micah wiped his wet hands on his apron, and he walked that wallet straight back out to the dining room, and he handed it back, every dollar still in it, to the quiet older man who had dropped it. He did not know the man was a billionaire. He just knew it was not his. And the old man took his wallet back and thanked the boy and watched him disappear into the kitchen. And something turned over in Lawrence Bishop that had not turned in 60 years, because he had once been exactly that boy in exactly that kind of kitchen, holding exactly that kind of wallet. So that night Lawrence Bishop did something he had not done in decades. He waited outside in the dark, and when the boy came off his shift at midnight, the billionaire followed him. He followed him to his second job. Stay with me all the way to the end. Because what Lawrence Bishop found when he followed that dishwasher through the night is the whole reason I am telling you this story. And before we begin, do me one kindness and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It always means more than you know. It was the kind of restaurant where the prices are not on the menu and the napkins are folded like swans. The sort of place that exists in every city for the people who never have to think about money. And in the back of it, where the guests never go, in the hot, wet roar of the dish pit, that was where Micah Dorsey spent his nights. A dishwasher is the lowest job in a restaurant, the invisible engine of the whole operation. And Micah was good at it the way he was good at everything, quietly, thoroughly, without complaint, because his mother had raised him that any job worth having is worth doing right, even the ones nobody sees. He came in at 4 and he ran the pit until close, scraping and stacking and blasting plates through the machine in clouds of steam until his shirt was soaked through and his hands were raw and wrinkled. And then he cleaned the pit itself and mopped and took out the trash, and at midnight, if he was lucky, he clocked out and went to his other job. He was 20 years old. He had been doing this for 2 years. And not one person in that fine restaurant, not the chef, not the manager, not the well-dressed guests, had any idea that the quiet kid in the dish pit was carrying a weight that would have broken most grown men in half. There is a particular kind of person who does the invisible jobs, the dish pits and the night shifts and the early mornings, and the world has trained itself to look right through them, to receive the clean plate, and never once think of the hands that made it clean. Micah had made his peace with the invisibility, mostly because his mother had taught him that the dignity of work does not come from whether anyone sees it. It comes from whether you do it right, and Micah did everything right. He was never late. He never cut a corner. He never complained, though he had more to complain about than anyone in that building. The chef, a hard man not given to praise, had said once that the kid in the pit was the best dishwasher he'd had in 20 years, and had never thought to wonder why a young man that capable was washing some dishes at 20 instead of doing something the world rewarded more. Nobody wondered about Micah. That is the thing about the invisible people. They are not actually invisible. We just decline to see them, and then we are astonished, on the rare occasions we are forced to look, by what they were carrying the whole time, right in front of us, while we looked away. On the night this story turns on, the restaurant had been slammed, a private party in the back room, and Micah had been run off his feet, and it was nearly closing when he was clearing the last of it, and found the wallet on the floor under the edge of a banquette. It was a beautiful thing, soft black leather worn smooth, heavy in his hand, and when it fell open he saw the cash, a thick fold of $100 bills, more money than Micah Dorsey had ever held at one time in his entire life. He did not count it. He did not have to. He could see that it was thousands, easily thousands, and he stood there in the empty back room with that wallet in his wet hands, and the world went very quiet around him. You and I, comfortable, well-fed, can sit here and know what the right thing to do is, because nothing is writing on it for us. It costs us nothing to be sure. But I want you to actually put yourself in that room, because the whole meaning of this story depends on it. You have not eaten a real meal in 2 days because the little ones come first. Your feet are bleeding in your shoes. There is a piece of paper taped to your door that is going to take away the only family you have left in 3 days. You have done everything right, everything. You have given up your entire future, and you are losing anyway slowly, with no way out that you can see. And then, out of nowhere, salvation falls onto the floor in front of you, wrapped in soft leather, and no one will ever know. That is not a small temptation. That is not a test most good people would pass, if we are honest, and anybody who tells you they would pass it easily has never once been that hungry. The reason Micah's choice matters, the reason it is worth a whole story, is precisely that it was not easy, that it cost him, that every fiber of his exhausted body and his terrified love for those children was screaming at him to keep it. That is what makes it honor. Honor is not the absence of temptation. Honor is what you do while the temptation is screaming. I need you to understand what that wallet was, in that moment, to that particular boy, because this is the whole hinge of everything. If a story about what a person does when no one is watching and everything is on the line is the reason you're here, then make sure you're subscribed, because what Micah Dorsey did in that empty room is the entire reason this story exists. 3 days. That was how long Micah had until the eviction. The notice was taped to the door of the little apartment where he was raising his 13-year-old brother, Jordan, and his 9-year-old sister, Tia. The apartment he could no longer quite afford on a dishwasher's wages and a night stalker's wages combined, no matter how many hours he worked, because there are only so many hours and rent does not care how tired you are. He was behind. He had been robbing one bill to pay another for months, a slow drowning, and the eviction notice was the water finally closing over his head, and Micah knew, with a cold clarity that no 20-year-old should have to know, exactly what eviction meant for him. It did not just mean losing the apartment. It meant that when the authorities found 3 kids with no parent and no home, they would do what they do, which is to take the children into the system. And the system does not keep siblings together. The system would split Jordan and Tia from each other and from him, scatter them into separate strangers' houses. And the one promise Micah had made over his mother's body 2 years before, the only promise that mattered, the promise to keep them together no matter what, would be broken, finally and forever. That was what was in the balance. And here, in his hands, fallen out of the sky, was a wallet with enough cash in it to make the eviction disappear, to catch up the rent, to buy a few more months, to keep his family together. Nobody had seen him pick it up. Nobody would ever know. The man who dropped it was clearly rich enough that he might not even miss it. Every argument a desperate mind can make, Micah's mind made, standing in that room. And they were good arguments. They were arguments for his family, for those 2 kids asleep across town who had no one in the world but him. He let himself feel the full weight of it, standing there, because he owed it to the decision to feel it honestly and not pretend it was easy. He thought about Jordan, 13 and angry and scared, in the way 13-year-old boys get scared, who needed his big brother more than he would ever admit. He thought about Tia, 9 years old, who still cried for their mother some nights and crawled into Micah's bed, and whom Micah had promised, the way you promise a child, that everything was going to be okay, a promise he was 3 days from being unable to keep. He thought about the morning he had stood in a courtroom at 18, terrified, and told a judge that he wanted to be his sibling's guardian, and the look the judge had given him, equal parts admiration and pity, the look that said, "Son, you have no idea what you are signing up for." He had not had any idea, and he had signed up for it anyway, and he had meant it, and he meant it still, and the meaning of it was the only thing Micah Dorsey owned outright in this world. The wallet could buy 3 more months. It could not buy back who he would have to become to take it. And Micah understood, in the quiet of that room, that the children did not just need a roof. They needed him, the real him, the one who would not become a thief even to save them, because what would he be saving them for, if he stopped being that? He had learned it from her in the leanest years, when learning it cost something. Yvette Dorsey had raised 3 children alone on the wages of a home health aide, which is to say on almost nothing. And there had been plenty of months when the lights were a choice against the groceries, and Micah had watched his mother, in those months, do the hard, honest thing again and again when the easy, dishonest thing was right there in front of her. He had watched her drive back across town to return the extra 20 a cashier mistakenly handed her. Gas she could not spare burned to return money that would have fed them. And when young Micah had asked her why, she had given him the line that would one day stand between him and a stranger's wallet. Anybody can be honest when they're full, baby. The test is staying honest when you're hungry. She had not said it as a slogan. She had said it as a woman who was, at that very moment, hungry, and staying honest anyway, and letting her son watch her do it, which is the only way that kind of thing ever really gets taught. She had not lived to see Micah pass the test she named, but she was the reason he passed it, standing in that back room, as surely as if she had been in there with him, which, in every way that counts, she was. And then Micah Dorsey heard his mother's voice. Not a ghost, just the truth she had pressed into him so many times it had become part of his own bones. Yvette Dorsey had not had much to give her children, but she had given them this over and over at the kitchen table, in the hard times that were the only times they ever had. Anybody can be honest when they're full, baby, she used to say. Anybody. That's easy. The test, the only test that counts, is whether you stay honest when you're hungry. That's when you find out who you really are. And Micah Dorsey, who was hungry in every way a person can be hungry, stood in that room and found out who he really was. He closed the wallet, he wiped his hands, and he carried it back out to the dining room, where the last guest was lingering over a coffee, a quiet, plainly dressed older man. And Micah held it out and said, "Sir, I think you dropped this. It's got a lot of cash in it. You should count it, but it's all there. I didn't touch it." And he turned to go back to his pit, back to his life, back to his 3 days. He did not make a speech of it. He did not even really think of it as a choice by the end, because his mother had made the choice for him years before, at a kitchen table, by putting the thing so deep into him that when the moment came there was, in truth, nothing left to decide. He just did it, the way you do the things that are actually part of you, automatically, almost without drama. And then he went back to his sink and his steam and his aching feet, and he did not feel noble, he felt tired, and a little sick with the nearness of what he had almost let himself want, and underneath it all, faint but real, he felt the one thing that returning it bought him that the cash never could have, which was that he could still look at himself in a mirror. He was still Micah. He was still the man his mother raised and the man those children trusted. He had lost the wallet. He had kept himself. And on the walk to his second job that night, hungry and broke and 3 days from disaster, Micah Dorsey did not regret it, not once, which is how you know it was really who he was. What Micah never saw hurrying back to his pit was the old man's face. He did not see the way the plainly dressed gentleman sat very still after the boy walked away, holding the returned wallet in both hands like something fragile, not counting it, not checking it, just holding it and looking at the doorway the boy had vanished through. He did not see the old man's eyes fill, or the way he sat there long after his coffee went cold, while the waiters cleared around him and waited, too polite to rush him. Micah had handed back a wallet and gone back to work and thought no more about it, because to Micah it was nothing. It was just what you did. He had no way of knowing that he had just walked, unknowing, straight into the one moment that would change the rest of his life, that the tired old man at the table was not seeing a dishwasher at all, but a ghost, his own ghost, 16 years old and starving and holding a stranger's wallet 60 years ago, and that the whole long-buried machinery of a man's conscience had just quietly begun to turn. Now I have to tell you about the old man, because the old man was not what he appeared to be, and what he did next changed everything. His name was Lawrence Bishop, and the reason he was dressed plainly and dining alone in the back of his own life was that Lawrence Bishop was a billionaire who had grown tired, very tired of being treated like one. He owned that restaurant. He owned a great many restaurants and hotels and more besides, an empire of hospitality with his name quietly behind it, built over 40 years into one of the great self-made fortunes in the South. And he had reached the age and the altitude where a man starts to ask the questions that money cannot answer, because Lawrence Bishop had everything a person could buy and almost nothing a person actually needs. His wife had passed. He had no children. He had spent his life building, and he had built a tower so high that he was now entirely alone at the top of it, surrounded by employees and advisors and people who wanted things, and not one single person on earth who loved him for anything other than what he could give them. He had taken to dining alone and unannounced in his own establishments, dressed like a regular man, partly to check on them and partly because it was the only way left to feel. For an hour, like an ordinary person instead of a fortune with a face. That was why he was there. That was why his wallet, fat with the cash he carried out of an old habit from poorer days, had slipped from his coat onto the floor. And that was why, when a soaked young dishwasher walked out of the kitchen and handed it back to him with every dollar in it and an apology for the trouble, Lawrence Bishop felt the ground move under 60 years of his life. It is a strange thing, to have everything and feel nothing, and it is more common among the very rich than the rest of us like to imagine. Lawrence Bishop had passed, decades ago, the point where more money could change his life in any way that mattered, and he had kept making it anyway, because making it was the only thing he knew how to do. And stopping would have meant sitting still long enough to notice how empty the house had become. His wife, Clara, the one person who had known him before the money and loved him without reference to it, had been gone 11 years. They had never been able to have children, the one failure his fortune could not buy its way out of. And so there was no son to teach the business to, no daughter to walk down an aisle, no grandchildren to spoil, no one at all to leave any of it to except foundations that would put his name on, buildings and lawyers who would bill the estate. He had become, without quite noticing the day it happened, a man whose only remaining pleasure was the gray, quiet pleasure of competence, and even that had gone thin. He dined alone in his own restaurants in plain clothes because it was the closest thing left to feeling like a person. And on the night a soaked dishwasher handed him back his own wallet. Lawrence Bishop had been sitting there feeling, beneath the wealth and the careful plain disguise, more profoundly alone than a man should ever have to feel, and wondering, in the way the old wonder, what in the name of God all of it had been for. Because Lawrence Bishop had been that boy, exactly that boy. 60 years before, in a city not unlike this one, a teenage Lawrence with nothing and no one had washed dishes in the back of a fine restaurant to survive, and one night he had found a wallet on the floor, a rich man's wallet, fat with cash, and he had stood there holding it with his whole desperate life in the balance, exactly as Micah had just stood, and he had made the same choice Micah made. He had handed it back, and the man whose wallet it was, a wealthy regular named Henry Caro, had been so struck by the sight of a starving dishwasher, returning a fortune, that he had done something that changed the entire course of Lawrence Bishop's life. He had asked the boy his name. He had asked him about himself. And then, over the months that followed, Henry Caro had quietly staked young Lawrence, had lent him the money for his first tiny lunch counter, had mentored him, had believed in him out loud, had been the single hinge on which a whole empire would eventually turn, all because a hungry boy had handed back a wallet he could have kept. Lawrence Bishop had built one of the great fortunes of his generation on the foundation of one honest act and one man's response to it, and somewhere in the 60 years of building he had forgotten. He had become hard and transactional and hollow, and had let the memory of Henry Caro fade into a nice story he told at Gallus about his humble beginnings. And now, on an ordinary Tuesday night, a soaked young dishwasher had walked out of the kitchen and handed Lawrence Bishop back his own beginning. He could see it as if it were yesterday, the kitchen 60 years gone, himself at 16, skinny and starving and angry at a world that had given him nothing, washing dishes for pennies and sleeping in a back room because he had nowhere else, and the night he found the billfold on the floor by the kitchen door, thick with cash, a wealthy man's wallet in a time and a place where a poor black boy who got caught near a rich man's money did not get the benefit of any doubt. He had stood there with it exactly as Micah had stood, every desperate argument running through his mind, and he had nearly kept it. He would admit that to his grave. He had come closer than Micah probably had, because the boy Lawrence had been was angrier and more alone than Micah, with no mother's voice in his head, because his mother was already gone. What had stopped him was not even virtue exactly. It was something smaller and stranger, a stubbornness, a refusal to become the thing the world already assumed he was. And he had handed it back to a regular named Henry Caro, a businessman who came in twice a week. And Caro had looked at that boy for a long moment, and instead of a tip or a thank you, he had asked the boy to sit down and asked him his name and his story, and seen something in him. And over the next 2 years, Henry Caro had quietly become the father Lawrence Bishop never had loaned him the money for a lunch counter, had co-signed and vouched and believed, and had never once made the boy feel like charity, had always called it an investment, had always said, "You're going to pay me back by being somebody." Lawrence had paid Henry Caro back the money many times over. But the other debt, the real one, the belief, that one he had never paid, because Henry Caro had died before Lawrence got rich, and you cannot pay that kind of thing back to the dead. You can only, Caro had told him once, pay it forward to some other boy someday when you find one worth it. Lawrence had been looking, without quite admitting he was looking, for 60 years. If your chest is tight right now, that's the story working. And this is the moment to subscribe, because what Lawrence Bishop did with what that boy gave him is everything I am trying to say. He could have rewarded the boy on the spot. He could have peeled off half the cash and pressed it on him and felt good about himself and gone home. The way the rich discharge these feelings, quickly, with money, before they have to actually be moved. But Lawrence Bishop did not do that, and the reason he did not is the reason this is a story worth telling. He looked at that boy, really looked, the way Henry Caro had once looked at him, and he saw past the apron and the exhaustion to something he recognized, a depth, a weight, a grief the boy was carrying that no 20-year-old should be carrying. And Lawrence Bishop, instead of reaching for his wallet, found himself needing to know who this child was, not to reward him, to understand him. So he did the thing the title of this story promises you. He paid his check and he left, and then he waited in the dark across the street in a city he had conquered. An old billionaire crouched in the shadows like a young man again. And when Micah Dorsey came out of the service door at midnight, gray with exhaustion, Lawrence Bishop followed him. And what he saw over the next few hours rearranged what was left of his life. He followed the boy to a bus stop and onto a bus and across the city, and he watched the boy not go home. He watched him walk into the loading dock of a big box store and tie on a different apron and begin a second full shift, stocking shelves through the dead hours of the night. The overnight job that Micah worked after the dishwashing job, 4 hours of heaving boxes on legs that had already been standing for 8. And Lawrence Bishop stood in the parking lot and watched a 20-year-old boy work himself past the edge of what a body should be asked to do. And he began slowly to understand the size of what he was looking at. He watched the boy heave boxes that staggered him, watched him pause and brace a hand against a shelf and breathe and then keep going, watched him do it for hours alone, in the dead fluorescent middle of the night when the rest of the city slept. And Lawrence did the arithmetic of it in his head. The dishwashing wage and the stocking wage added together against what he knew rent and groceries and 3 mouths cost in that city, and the numbers did not close. They could not close. There was no version of the math in which a boy working 2 full shifts could actually win this. And Lawrence understood that Micah surely knew that too, knew he was losing, and was working himself to the bone anyway, not because the work would save him, but because the only alternative to running was lying down. And Micah Dorsey was not built to lie down. It was the most familiar thing Lawrence Bishop had seen in 60 years. He had run that exact race against that exact math, in his own young body, a lifetime ago. And the only reason he had not been crushed by it was that one man had happened to look up from a returned wallet and decide to even the odds. Nobody works 2 full-time jobs back-to-back for fun. Nobody. That is not ambition, that is desperation. That is a person trying to outrun something that cannot be outrun by one set of hands no matter how hard they work. And Lawrence Bishop, who had once been exactly that desperate, recognized it in his marrow. He stayed until the boy's second shift ended at 4 in the morning, and he followed him home to a sagging apartment building in a hard part of the city. And he saw, taped to the door the boy unlocked, the bright official paper that he knew, from a lifetime in business, was an eviction notice. And then through the thin curtain, Lawrence Bishop saw something that finished what the wallet had started. He saw the exhausted boy, who had just worked 16 hours, quietly fixing breakfast at 4 in the morning for 2 small children who were getting up for school, braiding the little girl's hair with clumsy, careful hands, checking the boy's homework, being, at 20 years old, a father and a mother both, to children who were plainly not his own to raise, and whom he was plainly raising anyway, with a tenderness that broke the old billionaire's heart clean in 2. He stood in the cold blue dark outside that apartment for a long time after. The light went on, an old man in a good coat in a hard part of the city, and he watched through the gap in the curtain, and what he saw he would carry for the rest of his life. He had expected, following the boy, to find some ordinary explanation, a second job for spending money, a young man hustling the way the young do. He had not expected this. He had not expected the bone-deep tenderness of it, the way the exhausted boy moved around that small kitchen, the way he tested the little girl's forehead with the back of his hand the way mothers do, the way he sat with the older boy over a worksheet, and was patient, so patient, when he must have been falling down with exhaustion. Lawrence Bishop had built an empire on reading people, on knowing in 30 seconds what a person was made of, and he stood in that parking lot and read, in the body language of a 20-year-old he had followed home in the dark, a love so total and a burden so crushing and a dignity so complete that it reduced him the great Lawrence Bishop, to a weeping old man hiding in the shadows of a city he owned. He had handed his wallet to the best person he had met in 60 years, and the best person he had met in 60 years was about to be destroyed by the simple arithmetic of being good and broke in America. And Lawrence Bishop, for the first time in longer than he could remember, knew exactly what he was supposed to do with his money. This is the part I most want you to stay for, so if you're not subscribed, do it now. Because what Lawrence Bishop learned about that boy is the heart of everything. He did not approach them that morning. He went home instead, to his enormous empty house, and he did something he had not done in years, which was to make some quiet calls and find out the whole story. Because a man with Lawrence Bishop's resources can learn anything about anyone, and what he learned laid him low. He learned that Micah Dorsey had been a senior in high school 2 years before, a good student, a very good one, with a college acceptance and a small scholarship and a future, the first in his family who was going to get out. He learned that Micah's mother, Yvette, a single mother who had worked herself to the bone for her 3 children, had died suddenly, an aneurysm, gone in a day, leaving 3 kids and no other family willing or able to take them. He learned that Micah, 18 years old, standing in the wreckage, had made a choice that almost no 18-year-old would make. He had turned down the college and the scholarship and the future, the only ticket out he would ever be offered. And he had petitioned the court to become the legal guardian of his younger brother and sister so that they would not be taken and split up and scattered. He had given up his entire life, at 18, to keep a promise to his dead mother. And he had spent the 2 years since working himself into the ground at 2 jobs to keep that promise alive, slowly losing the race anyway. Because the math of being poor in America does not work no matter how hard you run. And now, 2 years in, 3 days from eviction, 3 days from losing the very children he had given up everything to keep, that boy had found a wallet full of enough cash to save them all, and had handed it back, because his mother had taught him that the test is whether you stay honest when you are hungry. Lawrence Bishop sat in his empty mansion and wept, an old man who had forgotten how, because he understood that he had just watched the single most honorable human being he had encountered in 60 years of dealing with the powerful and the privileged, and that human being was a 20-year-old dishwasher about to lose everything for the crime of being good and poor at the same time. The facts he assembled over the next 2 days only deepened it. He learned the boy's full name and his age and the address, and then he learned the things that are not in any public record, but that a man with resources can find. He learned that there had been a guidance counselor at Micah's high school who still spoke of him as the most promising student she had seen in a career, a kid with a real shot, a college acceptance, a small scholarship, the narrow door out that opens for so few. He learned that the door had closed on the day Yvette Dorsey collapsed on her way to her own job and was gone before the ambulance arrived, leaving 3 children and a sister too sick to take them, and a father long vanished, and a county social worker already filling out the forms to separate them. And he learned what the 18-year-old Micah had done in that moment, which was to walk into a courthouse and ask to carry, on his own back at 18, a weight the state itself did not want to carry, the weight of keeping his family whole. He had not been a hero in any way the world notices. He had not made the news. He had simply quietly given up his entire life so that 2 children would not lose each other on top of losing their mother. And then he had gone to wash dishes, and he had been washing them ever since. Lawrence Bishop, who had been given a hand up at 16 and had ridden it to the top of the world, understood that he was looking at a young man every bit as worthy as he had been, and a great deal more honorable, who was about to get no hand at all and be crushed for the crime of his own goodness. I want to step out of the story because Micah is one of a great many, and they are nearly invisible, and they deserve to be seen. All across this country there are young people, children really, who became the parents the day a parent died or disappeared, who are raising their younger siblings on no money and no help and no childhood of their own, who give up their educations and their futures and their 20s to keep a family together that the world would otherwise scatter. We have a name for it, kinship care, sibling care, and we have shamefully little support for it, so that these young people, who are doing one of the most heroic things a human being can do, are mostly left to do it alone, in poverty, one emergency away from losing the very people they sacrificed everything to protect. And the cruelest part is the part Micah lived, that the system which should support a young man heroically keeping his orphaned siblings together is instead the system poised to tear them apart the moment he stumbles, because we have built our safety net to catch the children only by first breaking the family. Micah Dorsey was not an exception. He was one of thousands, most of whom no billionaire will ever follow home. And the honesty he showed, returning that wallet when keeping it would have saved his family, is a kind of integrity the comfortable are almost never tested on, because you cannot fail a test you are never given, and the well-fed are never given the test that Micah passed. And I want to name the specific cruelty of it, because it is a cruelty we have built on purpose and could choose to unbuild. When a parent dies and a young adult sibling steps up to keep the family together, that young person is doing the single thing that is best for those children. Keeping them with blood, keeping them with someone who loves them, keeping them out of a foster system that we all know, in our honest moments, too often fails the children in it, and we give them almost nothing for it. The supports that would flow to a foster family, the recruited, often do not flow to the brother who steps up out of love, so that the people doing the right thing for free are left more unsupported than the strangers being paid to do it. We make it harder, not easier, to keep a family together. And then, when the unsupported young guardian inevitably stumbles under a weight we refused to share, we step in at last, not to help, but to take the children and scatter them, which is the very outcome he sacrificed everything to prevent. Micah was running a race we had rigged against him from the start, and his honesty in that back room was not just admirable, it was almost defiant, a refusal to let a rigged world make him into something smaller than his mother raised. There are, by the most careful counts, more than 2 million children in this country being raised by relatives other than their parents. And behind a great many of those numbers is a young person like Micah who stepped into a gap that opened when an adult died or fell, and who is doing it quietly, unsupported, unseen. They do not march, they do not make the news. They get up and they go to the 2 jobs, and they braid the hair and check the homework and pay the rent that does not quite get paid. And they hold a family together with their bare hands against a current designed to pull it apart. The next time you hear someone talk about the kind of person who is supposedly dragging this country down, picture Micah Dorsey in that dish pit at midnight and understand that the truth is the exact opposite, that the country is held up in 10,000 invisible places by people exactly like him, asking for nothing, getting nothing, staying honest when they are hungry. We owe them more than a story. But a story is where it starts, because you cannot help the people you have trained yourself not to see. And the first thing any of this asks of you is simply to start seeing them. So Lawrence Bishop made a decision, and then he did the thing that made all the difference, which was that he did not simply swoop in with a check, because Lawrence Bishop, of all people, understood that a young man with that kind of pride and that kind of integrity would not take charity, would in fact be insulted by it, would hand it back the way he handed back the wallet. So Lawrence did it the right way. He went back to the restaurant the next evening, and he asked the manager to send Micah out. And when the boy came out wary and confused, certain he had done something wrong, Lawrence Bishop introduced himself, his real self, and watched the boy's eyes widen as he understood that the plain old man whose wallet he'd returned owned the entire restaurant, owned dozens of them. And then Lawrence Bishop did not offer him money. He told him a story. He told Micah about a hungry dishwasher 60 years ago who found a rich man's wallet on the floor and handed it back, and about a man named Henry Caro who saw it and changed that dishwasher's life. And he told Micah that he was that dishwasher, that everything Lawrence Bishop had, all of it, every restaurant and every dollar, existed because one time a long time ago, somebody chose to believe in a poor boy who passed the test. And then he said, Henry Caro did something for me that I never paid back, because I never could. You cannot pay that kind of thing back. You can only pay it forward. And I have been waiting 60 years for the right person to pay it forward to. And last night you walked out of my kitchen and handed me my wallet, and I knew. So I am not offering you charity, son. I would not insult you with charity. I am offering you what Henry Caro offered me. I am going to invest in you. And you are going to pay me back not with money, but the same way I am paying Henry Caro back right now, 60 years too late, by doing this for somebody else someday. That is the only repayment I will accept. Micah did not understand at first. He stood there in his apron, certain there was a catch, because his life had taught him that there is always a catch, that nothing this size comes free, and that men with this much power do not simply hand it to dishwashers. And Lawrence Bishop, who had thought the exact same thing at 16, was ready for it. and did not push, and did not flash the money, and did not perform generosity. He simply sat with the boy in the back of the restaurant, two men who had washed the same dishes 60 years apart, and he answered every suspicious question honestly, and he let the boy take his time, and he said the thing that finally landed, which was this: "Son, I am not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I have felt sorry for 1,000 people and never lifted a finger. I am doing this because you are the best return on investment I have ever seen, and I have spent my whole life evaluating investments. You handed back a wallet that would have saved your family because of who your mother made you. A person who will do that is a person worth betting everything on. Henry Caro figured that out about me in one night 60 years ago, and he was right, and I have spent a fortune proving him right ever since. I am simply doing now what he did then, and the only way you can ever pay me back is to be right about, and good to, somebody yourself someday. That is the whole deal. Take it. If you've made it this far with me, here at the part that matters most, then stay, because what Lawrence Bishop built with that boy is the thing this whole story was reaching for. It was the only way Micah Dorsey could ever have accepted it, framed not as a handout but as a debt and a duty and a chain stretching back 60 years. And even then he resisted, because that was who he was. And Lawrence loved him for the resistance the way Henry Caro must have loved him for his. But Lawrence Bishop was a patient and immovable old man, and piece by piece he made it real. The eviction was the first thing, handled within the hour, the back rent cleared, the family secured, but that was just stopping the bleeding. What Lawrence built was a life. He moved the three of them out of the sagging building and into a real home, a safe one, in a good school district, and he made sure Jordan and Tia had everything they needed, the doctors and the tutors and the simple security of knowing they would not be torn apart the childhood Micah had been killing himself to protect. And for Micah, Lawrence Bishop gave back the future the boy had laid down on his mother's grave. He paid for Micah to go to college, the one he had turned down, and more than that, he brought Micah into his own world, into the company. Not at the top as a charity case, but at the bottom as a bishop always insisted his best people start, learning the business from the dish pit up, exactly the way Lawrence had, so that the boy could become, over the years, not Lawrence Bishop's project, but his protege, and eventually, the old man came quietly to hope, something he had never had and never expected, an heir, not to his money, to his name and his work, and the thing Henry Caro had really given him, which was a belief that gets passed down, hand to hand, generation to generation, that a person's character is worth more than a fortune, and that the right thing to do with a fortune is to go looking for character and back it. It changed everything, and it changed it carefully in the order that mattered. First, the bleeding stopped, the eviction erased in a single phone call, the family safe in their own beds that very night. Then came the home, a real one, in a neighborhood with good schools and quiet streets. And the thing Lawrence understood that a lesser benefactor would have missed, which was that the gift had to land on the children's stability first and Micah's pride last, because Micah would accept for Jordan and Tia what he would never have accepted for himself. The boy who had refused a wallet would have refused a mansion, but he could not refuse safety for the children he had bled to protect, and so Lawrence gave the children safety and let Micah accept the rest as the price of it. And then, slowly, Lawrence gave Micah back the future the boy had laid down. College, the one he had turned down, taken up at last, paid in full, but more than that, a place in the company, earned and not given, starting where Lawrence had started, learning the whole thing from the bottom, so that what grew between the old man and the young one was not the relationship of a donor and a charity case, but something far rarer and far better, a mentorship, an apprenticeship, and finally, though neither of them said the word out loud for a long time, a kind of family. The old man teaching the young one everything he knew, the young one giving the old one the one thing his billions had never bought, which was somebody to give it all to who would actually deserve it. Micah did not tell the children, at first, the whole of it, because he could not find the words, and because he was still half waiting for it to be snatched back. But the night the eviction was lifted, he sat Jordan and Tia down at the kitchen table, the same kind of table where their mother used to sit them down, and he told them that they were going to be okay. And this time, for the first time in 2 years, he was not lying to make a 9-year-old feel better. This time it was true. And Tia, who had heard everything is going to be okay too many times to trust it, looked at her big brother's face and saw that he believed it, and burst into tears, and Jordan, 13 and too cool to cry, put his head down on the table and cried too. And Micah Dorsey sat with his brother and his sister in a kitchen that was no longer about to be taken from them. And he thought about his mother, and he thought about the wallet, and he understood that he had been right, in that back room, that the cash could never have bought this clean and whole and unafraid, that the only road to this particular table ran straight through handing the money back. He had kept the promise. Against everything, against the math, against the odds, the promise he made over his mother's body was kept. And the three of them were still together, and they were going to stay that way. And Lawrence Bishop did one more thing, the thing that made it bigger than the two of them. Because he had seen, following Micah through that night, how many invisible Micahs there must be, he established a foundation, and he put real money behind it and Micah's name on the board of it, dedicated to exactly the young people the world overlooks, the kinship caregivers, the kids raising kids, the sibling guardians, grinding themselves to nothing to keep their families together, finding them, the way Lawrence had found Micah, and catching them before they fell, with the rent money and the legal help and the scholarships and the simple message that somebody sees what you are doing and somebody is going to help you keep that promise you made. He called it, over Micah's embarrassed objections, the Yvette Dorsey Foundation, after the mother who had raised a son honest enough to hand back a wallet when he was starving, because Lawrence understood that everything good in this story traced back to a poor woman at a kitchen table teaching her boy that you stay honest when you are hungry, and that her name deserved to be on something that would outlive them all. The Yvette Dorsey Foundation grew, in the years that followed, into something neither of them had fully imagined at the start. It went looking deliberately for the invisible ones, the young guardians and the kinship caregivers and the kids quietly raising kids in the cracks of a country that had decided not to see them, and it found them the way Lawrence had found Micah, and it caught them before they fell. It paid the back rent that would have meant an eviction and a scattering. It funded the lawyers who helped a 19-year-old win guardianship of her little brothers. It paid for the college that a young caregiver had given up on, the way Micah had given up on his and handed it back. And every young person the foundation lifted was told the same thing Lawrence had told Micah and Henry Caro had told Lawrence, that this was not charity, it was an investment and a debt, and that the only repayment ever expected was that they go and do it for somebody else, someday. The chain Henry Caro started in a restaurant kitchen 60 years before did not end with Lawrence, and it did not end with Micah. It branched into hundreds of young lives, and then into the lives those young people would themselves go on to lift, on and on, a hidden river of paid-forward grace running out of one poor woman's table and the boy she taught to stay honest when he was hungry. Years later, Micah Dorsey ran that foundation, alongside the work he did learning the business that everyone now understood he would one day inherit. And Jordan grew up safe and went to college himself. And Tia, the little girl whose hair Micah used to braid at 4 in the morning with clumsy, exhausted hands, grew up to become, of all things, a social worker dedicated to keeping families together because she had seen what it cost her brother to keep theirs. And Jordan, the angry, frightened 13-year-old, grew into a steady young man who never quite lost the wariness of those years, but who knew, all the way down, that his brother had stood between him and the abyss and refused to move. And that knowledge made him, in his own turn, the kind of man who stands between other people and their abysses. The 3 Dorsey children, whom a system had been 3 days from scattering to the winds, grew up together, in the same house, with the same last name and the same memories and the same brother at the head of the table. Exactly as their mother would have wanted, exactly as Micah had sworn over her grave they would. He had been 20 years old and broke and hungry and 3 days from losing them, and he had handed a fortune back to a stranger rather than become someone his mother would not recognize. And somehow, by a road no one could ever have predicted, that one stubborn act of integrity had purchased the only thing he had ever actually wanted, which was simply to keep his family whole. And Lawrence Bishop, who had been entirely alone at the top of his tower, spent the last good years of his life not alone at all, but surrounded by a family he had found in a dish pit, an old man finally rich in the only way that it ever actually mattered. And when he died held, which is more than his billions had ever once promised him. At the funeral years on, it was Micah Dorsey who spoke, because by then there was no question who Lawrence Bishop's family had been, and Micah stood up in front of a room full of the powerful and the grand who had known the billionaire, and he told them about a wallet, He told them that he had met Mr. Bishop on the worst night of his life, 3 days from losing everything, and that the old man had followed him home in the dark and then spent the rest of his life refusing to let Micah's goodness be punished by the world. He told them that everything he had become, the education and the career and the man he had grown into, traced back to a single night and a single choice and a single old man who chose to believe in him. And then Micah Dorsey told that grand room the thing his mother used to say, the thing that had started all of it, that anybody can be honest when they are full, and that the test is staying honest when you are hungry. And he told them that he had passed that test once, on a kitchen floor, with a fortune in his hands, and that it was the most important thing he had ever done, more important than any of the things the money later made possible, because it was the thing that made him worth the betting on. Be the kind of person, he told them, who hands the wallet back when no one is watching, because someday, he said, somebody just might be, and then you find out that the wallet was never the test, you were. I want to tell you something, here at the end. The thing that saved Micah Dorsey was not the billionaire. I want to be careful about that, because it would be easy to take from this story the idea that the answer to a good poor person's suffering is to get lucky and be spotted by a rich one, and that is not the lesson. That is a lottery, and most of the Micahs will never win it. The thing that saved Micah Dorsey was the thing Micah did before any billionaire was watching, the thing he did when he believed no one was watching at all, alone in an empty room with a fortune in his hands and every reason in the world to keep it. He handed it back. He passed the test his mother had named, the test that the comfortable are never given, the test of whether you stay who you are when staying who you are costs you everything. The billionaire did not make Micah good. The billionaire was simply lucky enough, for once in his hollow life, to be standing there when goodness walked out of a kitchen, and wise enough, at the very end, to recognize that goodness is the rarest and most valuable thing on earth, rarer than any fortune, and that the only worthy thing to do with a fortune is to spend it backing the people who have it. Most of them, nobody backs. That is the part I cannot make pretty for you. But I can tell you this, the goodness is real whether anybody sees it or not, and it was real in that empty room. And a young man's character does not depend on a billionaire happening to walk by. It depends only on the young man, and Micah Dorsey was that young man with or without Lawrence Bishop. The billionaire just got the privilege of being the Henry Caro this time. We don't all get to be billionaires, but every single one of us gets to decide, in our own empty rooms, who we are when we are hungry. And every one of us gets to be somebody's Henry Caro, in whatever small way we can, when we are lucky enough to see a person hand the wallet back. So, let me leave you with a question tonight. When was the last time you were alone with the wallet, so to speak? The moment no one was watching and the wrong thing would have been so easy and so understandable. And you did the right thing anyway, for no reward, because of who you decided to be. Tell me about it in the comments, and tell me about the Henry Caro in your own life, the person who believed in you when you were nobody and had nothing, and say their name, because they deserve to be remembered. I read everyone, and it always means more than you know. And one real thing before I go, because there are real Micahs out there tonight. If you are a young person raising younger siblings or other family, or if you know one, please know that you are not as alone as you feel, that what you are doing is one of the most honorable things a human being can do, and that there is help. You can dial 211 from almost anywhere in the United States to be connected to assistance with rent, food, legal help, and kinship care resources in your area. And there are organizations dedicated specifically to supporting kinship and sibling caregivers who can help you keep your family together. Asking for that help is not a failure of the promise you made. It is one of the ways you keep it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet goodness is real and still walks among us, often in a wet apron, mostly unseen. Subscribe for a new story every week. And the next time you are alone with the wallet, remember Micah Dorsey, and remember that who you are when you are hungry is the truest thing about you, and that somebody, somewhere, may be watching, and that even if no one is, it still matters more than anything else you will ever do. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one.